Have you ever wondered how the first cities, empires, and written words came to be? Close your eyes and travel back in time to the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. From the rise of the Sumerians to the power of Babylon, this is a journey through the heart of history that shaped the world as we know it. So, get comfortable and drift into sleep. As we explore the entire story of ancient Mesopotamia, one civilization at a time, the ancient land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, known as Mesopotamia, is often called the cradle of civilization because it is where humanity first transitioned from small, scattered villages to large, complex societies. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians began to form these early cities, creating a civilization that would shape the future of human history. The Sumerians, who lived in what is modern-day southern Iraq, are credited with the invention of the first true cities. The most famous of these cities were Uruk, Ur, and Uruk. One of the earliest urban centers was a bustling metropolis with walls that stretched for miles. These cities were characterized by their monumental structures, including temples, palaces, and marketplaces, all serving as the heart of Sumerian life. What set the Sumerians apart from other ancient cultures was their remarkable advances in writing, technology, and urban planning. Around 3100 BCE, the Sumerians invented cuneiform, one of the earliest systems of writing. Cuneiform was created by pressing a reed stylus into soft clay tablets, leaving wedge-shaped marks. This system allowed the Sumerians to record important information, such as trade transactions, laws, and religious texts. The earliest examples of cuneiform are administrative records, but over time it was used to preserve epic stories. It's like the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. In addition to writing, the Sumerians are also known for their technological innovations. They invented the wheel, which revolutionized transportation and trade. They also developed sophisticated irrigation systems that harnessed the power of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, enabling them to grow crops in the otherwise arid land. This agricultural revolution led to a surplus of food, which allowed the population to grow and more people to specialize in different trades, from pottery making to metalworking. At the heart of Sumerian society were the Ziggurats, massive stepped structures built to honor the gods. These temples were not just places of worship, but also centers of political and economic power. The most famous Ziggurat, located in the city of Ur, was dedicated to the moon god Nana. It stood several stories high and was visible from miles around, symbolizing the Sumerians' belief that their rulers were chosen by the gods to govern on their behalf. The ziggurat was also a symbol of the unity between religion and governance in Sumerian society. Religion played a central role in the daily lives of the Sumerians. They believed that their gods controlled every aspect of the world, from the weather to the success of crops. Each city had its own patron god. The Sumerians believed that the god's favor was necessary for the prosperity of the city. The Sumerians practiced polytheism, worshipping a wide range of deities, including Anu, the sky god, and Enlil, the god of air and storms. Temples were the most important buildings in Sumerian cities, and their priests held considerable power, often acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. The Sumerians also established one of the earliest known legal codes. King Ur-Nammu, who ruled around 2100 BCE, is credited with creating a law code that set down rules for everything from property rights to punishments for criminal behavior. The laws were written on clay tablets and placed in public areas so that everyone could see them. Ur-Nammu's legal system is considered one of the first steps toward modern law and order, providing the framework for later civilizations to build upon. As the Sumerians flourished, they set the stage for the great empires that would follow. Their innovations in writing, technology, law, and religion influenced the rise of Babylon and Assyria, who would go on to dominate the region for centuries. But even after their decline, the legacy of the Sumerians lived on. Their stories, their achievements, and their understanding of the world laid the foundation for future generations to build upon, and their civilization is remembered as one of the most important in human history. Around 2334 BCE, the Sumerians, with all their cultural and technological advancements, would face a new challenge. A new power was rising from the North Akkadian Empire. This would not only mark the rise of one of the first true empires in history, but also set the stage for future conflicts, alliances, and shifts in power across Mesopotamia. The Akkadians were Semitic-speaking people who lived to the north of the Sumerians. Unlike the Sumerians, who had settled in city-states with their own local governments and rulers, the Akkadians, under the leadership of Sargon the Great, sought to create a centralized empire. Sargon, whose name means the true king, was a revolutionary leader who believed in unifying the cities of Mesopotamia under one banner. His ambitions led to the eventual conquest of Sumer and the creation of the Akkadian Empire, which spanned much of Mesopotamia. Sargon's rise to power is surrounded by legend. According to ancient stories, he was born a commoner, abandoned by his parents, and raised by a gardener. Despite these humble beginnings, Sargon's military prowess and ambition led him to seize control of the city of Kish. From there, he embarked on a series of military campaigns that would change the course of history. By defeating the Sumerian city-states one by one, Sargon consolidated power, and within a short period, controlled an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. Under Sargon's rule, the Akkadian Empire became the first to unite the diverse and often warring peoples of Mesopotamia. This unification was not only political, but also cultural. Sargon promoted the Akkadian language, which gradually replaced Sumerian as the dominant language of administration, trade, and religion. The Akkadian language became the lingua franca of the region, facilitating communication between the diverse cultures of Mesopotamia and beyond. This cultural unity under Sargon's rule also led to the spread of Akkadian literature, art, and religious practices which influenced later empires, including Babylon and Assyria. Sargon's empire was also notable for its military innovations. The Akkadians were among the first to use professional soldiers, who were well-trained and well-equipped, in contrast to the Sumerian city-states, where armies were often made up of temporary conscripts. Sargon's army used advanced tactics and technologies, including the use of chariots in battle, which gave them a significant advantage over their enemies. With their superior military strategy, the Akkadians were able to maintain control over their vast empire for several generations. Despite its initial success, the Akkadian Empire eventually faced challenges that led to its downfall. After Sargon's death in 2279 BCE, his successors struggled to maintain control over the empire. Internal rebellions, invasions from the Gutians, a mountain people from the east, and economic instability weakened the Akkadian Empire. The empire's collapse was also exacerbated by a severe drought, which may have disrupted agriculture and caused widespread famine. The fall of the Akkadian Empire marked the end of the first truly centralized empire in Mesopotamia, but its legacy lived on. The Akkadians laid the groundwork for the future empires of the region, including the Babylonian and Assyrian empires, both of which would rise to power in the centuries that followed. The Akkadians also influenced the development of art, literature, and religion, with their mythological stories and royal inscriptions providing a rich source of cultural material for future generations. Despite its fall, the Akkadian Empire's influence can still be felt in the region today. Sargon's vision of a united empire set a precedent for future rulers, and his ability to forge a multi-ethnic empire through military strength, political astuteness, and cultural unity is a model that would inspire future leaders throughout history. After the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, Mesopotamia entered a period of turmoil, with various groups vying for power. However, in 1894 BCE, a new empire would rise from the ashes of the Akkadians, the Babylonian Empire. Babylon, which was once a small city-state, would go on to become one of the most powerful and influential empires in the ancient world. The Babylonians were originally a Semitic people who had settled in the southern part of Mesopotamia, near the Euphrates River. They were heavily influenced by the earlier Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations, adopting many of their customs, religious beliefs, and technological innovations. However, what set the Babylonians apart was their ability to unite the region and create a centralized state that could endure for centuries. The first king to truly establish Babylon as a powerful force was Hammurabi, who reigned from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. Hammurabi is best known for his legal code, the Code of Hammurabi, which is one of the oldest and most complete written legal codes in history. The Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a large stone, stele, and placed in public places for all to see. The code consisted of 282 laws, covering topics such as family relations, property rights, and business transactions. It also included harsh punishments for certain crimes, including death for theft and adultery, and the famous principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Hammurabi's legal code not only helped to bring order and stability to the Babylonian Empire, but also served as a model for future legal systems. The principles behind the code influenced many later civilizations, including those of the Greeks and Romans, and can still be seen in modern legal practices today. Hammurabi's reign also marked the height of Babylonian power. He expanded the empire through military conquests, incorporating neighboring regions such as Elam, Assyria, and Mari into the Babylonian fold. At its peak, the Babylonian Empire controlled much of Mesopotamia and parts of the surrounding regions. Babylon itself became a center of culture, learning, and commerce. The city was famous for its impressive architecture, including the legendary Ishtar Gate, which was adorned with blue glazed bricks and images of dragons and bulls. The Babylonians were also renowned for their advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They created a sexagesimal base 60 number system, which is still used today to measure time and angles. Babylonian astronomers were able to predict celestial events such as eclipses and planetary movements, which helped them develop a detailed calendar. Despite its initial successes, the Babylonian Empire eventually began to decline. After Hammurabi's death, the empire faced internal strife and external invasions. Successive kings were unable to maintain control over the vast territories that Hammurabi had conquered. The empire weakened over time, and in 1595 BCE, it was sacked by the Hittites, a powerful group from Anatolia. Although Babylon would continue to exist as a city-state, its status as an empire was gone. However, the legacy of the Babylonian Empire lived on, especially through the city of Babylon itself. In the 6th century BCE, the city would rise to prominence once again under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most famous kings of Babylon, is known for his military campaigns, his restoration of the city's walls and temples, and his construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Under his reign, Babylon became the largest and most powerful city in the world, attracting merchants, scholars, and artists from all over the ancient world. Despite its eventual fall to the Persians in 539 BCE, the influence of Babylon and its contributions to law, culture, and science would continue to echo throughout history. The legacy of Hammurabi's code, the city's architectural marvels, the Babylonians' astronomical achievements would be remembered for centuries to come, shaping the future of the ancient world and beyond. Following the decline of the Babylonian Empire, a new power emerged in the north, one that would dominate the ancient Near East for centuries: the Assyrian Empire, known for their military might and ruthless tactics. The Assyrians would become one of the most feared and effective empires in ancient history. At their height, the Assyrians controlled a vast territory, stretching from Egypt in the west to the Persian Gulf in the east. The Assyrians were originally a Semitic people who lived in the northern part of Mesopotamia, centered around the city of Assur, from which their empire took its name. Unlike the Babylonians, who relied on diplomacy and trade, the Assyrians focused on military expansion. The Assyrian army was one of the most advanced and well-organized forces of the ancient world, and it played a key role in the empire's rise to power. The Assyrians perfected the art of siege warfare, using advanced tactics to break through fortified city walls. They employed battering rams, ladders, and even movable siege towers, which allowed them to breach enemy fortifications with ease. They also developed an efficient and organized military structure, with a standing army, professional soldiers, and a system of communication that allowed commanders to coordinate attacks across vast distances. The Assyrians were known for their brutality in battle, often using terror to intimidate and demoralize their enemies. They employed psychological warfare by flaying captives alive or impaling them on stakes, sending a clear message to anyone who dared oppose them. One of the most famous Assyrian kings was Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned from 745 BCE to 727 BCE under his leadership. The Assyrians expanded their empire significantly, conquering vast swaths of territory in the Near East. Tiglath-Pileser III reformed the Assyrian military and established a system of provincial governors to maintain control over conquered lands. This system, allowed the Assyrians to efficiently administer their empire, extracting tribute and resources from the regions they controlled. However, it was King Ashurbanipal who ruled from 668 BCE to 627 BCE, who is often considered the greatest of all Assyrian rulers. Ashurbanipal's military campaigns brought the Assyrian Empire to its greatest territorial extent, and his conquests included Egypt, the Levant, and parts of Anatolia. He was not only a military leader, but also a patron of the arts and learning. Under his reign, the Assyrians built one of the most famous libraries of the ancient world in the city of Nineveh, which contained thousands of clay tablets with records of history, literature, and science. This library, discovered in the 19th century, is one of the most significant archaeological finds of the ancient world, providing scholars with valuable insights into Assyrian society and culture. Despite their military successes, the Assyrians' brutal tactics and constant warfare eventually led to their downfall. After Ashurbanipal's death, the Assyrian Empire began to fragment. Internal rebellions, combined with external pressures from the Babylonians and the Medes, weakened the empire. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes sacked the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, marking the end of the Assyrian Empire. The fall of the Assyrians marked the beginning of a new era in Mesopotamian history, as the Babylonians would rise to power once again. However, the Assyrian legacy lived on in the military techniques, administrative systems, and cultural contributions they left behind. The Assyrians' emphasis on military organization, their use of terror as a weapon of war, and their achievements in art and literature would influence future empires for centuries to come. The Assyrian Empire may have fallen, but their story is one of power, conquest, and cultural achievement that continues to capture the imagination of historians and archaeologists today. After the fall of the Assyrian Empire in 612 BCE, the ancient Near East entered a period of change and reorganization. From the ruins of Assyria, a new power emerged, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. This empire would be defined by the leadership of one of the most famous rulers in ancient history, King Nebuchadnezzar II, whose reign from 605 BCE to 562 BCE would bring Babylon to its peak. Nebuchadnezzar II was a military genius and a visionary leader, and under his rule, Babylon transformed into one of the most powerful and beautiful cities in the ancient world. He expanded the borders of the empire, launching successful military campaigns in the Levant, including the conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, which resulted in the destruction of the First Temple and the forced exile of the Jewish people to Babylon, a significant event in Jewish history known as the Babylonian exile. Nebuchadnezzar, his military prowess and his ability to maintain control over a vast empire solidified his reputation as one of the most powerful kings of his time. Nebuchadnezzar's reign, however, is not remembered only for its military campaigns. It is also remembered for the grandeur and beauty of the city of Babylon itself. Nebuchadnezzar was deeply devoted to the gods, particularly Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, and he undertook massive construction projects to honor them. One of the most iconic achievements of his reign was the construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which were said to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The gardens, though their exact location remains a subject of debate, were believed to have been a stunning terrace structure filled with lush plants and flowing water, built for Nebuchadnezzar's wife Amidis, who missed the green hills of her homeland. In addition to the Hanging Gardens, Nebuchadnezzar commissioned the rebuilding of Babylon's walls and gates. The Ishtar Gate, made of glazed brick, adorned with images of dragons and bulls, is one of the most magnificent architectural achievements of the ancient world. The gate, once part of a larger ceremonial entrance to the city, was so impressive that it was later excavated and reconstructed in Berlin. Nebuchadnezzar also rebuilt the city's temples, including the Esagila, the great temple dedicated to Marduk, as well as the Ziggurat known as Etemenanke, which is often thought to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon became not just the political and military center of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, but also a hub of culture, science, and learning. Babylonian scholars made significant advances in astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The Babylonians were skilled astronomers, and they developed a highly accurate lunar calendar, which they used to track the movements of the stars and planets. They were also pioneers in the field of mathematics, developing a base 60 number system that is still used today to measure time and angles. Despite his achievements, Nebuchadnezzar's reign was not without challenges. Towards the end of his reign, the empire began to experience internal instability, and following his death in 562 BCE, the empire gradually weakened. His successors were unable to maintain the strength of the empire, and in 539 BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire fell to the Persian Empire under King Cyrus the Great. However, the legacy of Nebuchadnezzar and the Neo-Babylonian Empire endured long after its collapse. The influence of Babylon on the ancient world cannot be overstated. Its advances in architecture, science, and literature left a lasting impact on later civilizations, including the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, with its grand buildings, gardens, and cultural achievements, has captured the imagination of generations, and the city of Babylon remains one of the most iconic cities in ancient history. The fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire marked the end of Babylon's dominance in the region, but the memory of its splendor continues to resonate throughout history, symbolizing the height of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. In 539 BCE, the mighty Neo-Babylonian Empire fell to a new and rising power, the Persian Empire.
Wow.
Led by King Cyrus the Great, the Persians would go on to establish one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to Greece in the west. The rise of the Persian Empire marked the end of Babylonian dominance and the beginning of a new era in Mesopotamian history, one defined by conquest, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Cyrus the Great, whose full name was Cyrus II, was the first king of the Achaemenid dynasty, which would rule Persia for over 2 centuries. He is often considered one of history's greatest military leaders due to his ability to unite disparate peoples and create an empire that spanned 3 continents. What set Cyrus apart from many of his contemporaries was his approach to empire building. Instead of relying solely on military force, he also practiced a policy of tolerance and respect for the customs, religions, and traditions of the lands he conquered. This approach allowed him to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire without alienating its many peoples. The Persian Empire's expansion began with the conquest of Media, a region to the north of Persia. From there, Cyrus turned his attention to the Lydian kingdom in modern-day Turkey, defeating King Croesus in 546 BCE and adding Lydia's wealth to his growing empire. The most famous of Cyrus's conquests, however, came in 539 BCE when he captured the city of Babylon. The fall of Babylon was not just a military victory but also a symbolic moment. In the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is portrayed as a liberator who allowed the Jewish people who had been exiled to Babylon after the destruction of the first temple to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. This act of kindness and tolerance solidified Cyrus's reputation as a just ruler in the eyes of many. Under Cyrus and his successors, the Persian Empire became known for its remarkable system of governance. Unlike previous empires that relied on centralized control, the Persians developed a system of satrapious provinces governed by officials known as satraps. These satraps were responsible for maintaining law and order, collecting taxes, and overseeing the local population. This decentralized system allowed the Persian Empire to manage its vast territories efficiently, ensuring that even distant regions could function autonomously while still remaining loyal to the central authority in Persepolis, the empire's capital. The Persians also built an extensive network of roads, the most famous of which was the Royal Road, which connected the heart of the empire in Persia to its western provinces in Anatolia. This road system facilitated trade, communication, and military movements across the empire, ensuring that messages and supplies could be transported quickly. The Persian postal system, with its relay stations and fast couriers, was one of the most advanced of the ancient world. The Persian Empire's commitment to tolerance and cultural exchange also had a lasting impact on the regions it controlled. The Persians allowed the peoples they conquered to retain their own languages, religions, and customs, as long as they paid tribute and remained loyal. This policy of religious and cultural tolerance was one of the key reasons for the empire's success. For example, in Egypt, the Persians maintained the traditional priesthood, and allowed the Egyptians to continue worshipping their gods. While in Mesopotamia, they respected the local Babylonian religious practices. Despite its remarkable achievements, the Persian Empire was not without its challenges. After Cyrus's death in 530 BCE, his son Cambyses II continued the conquest of Egypt, but faced rebellions in the western territories. The empire's expansion slowed under his reign, and it was not until the rule of Darius I 522 BCE to 486 BCE that the Persian Empire reached its greatest extent. Darius reorganized the empire, creating a uniform system of weights and measures, standardizing the currency, and building grand architectural projects, including the construction of the Persepolis Palace complex. The Persian Empire continued to thrive under Darius's successors. But by the late 4th century BCE, the empire faced growing internal strife and external threats. In 334 BCE, the Persian Empire faced its greatest challenge in the form of Alexander the Great of Macedonia. After a series of decisive defeats, including the famous Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander overthrew the Persian Empire, marking the end of one of the most powerful empires in history. The legacy of the Persian Empire, however, lived on in the regions it once controlled. Persian culture, art, and architecture influenced many of the civilizations that followed, and the Persians' approach to governance, infrastructure, and religious tolerance set a model for future empires. The Persian Empire's enduring impact on world history continues to be felt today, as its influence can be seen in the development of the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome, and in the history of the Middle East. In just a decade, he would conquer much of the known world, including the mighty Persian Empire, Egypt, and parts of India. Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to the edges of India, making him one of the most successful military leaders in history. However, despite his achievements, the legacy of Alexander's empire was not to be found in the borders he conquered, but in the cultural exchange and blending of civilizations that occurred in the wake of his conquests. Armed with a powerful and disciplined army, he was able to defeat the Persian king Darius III in several key battles, including the Battle of Granicus 334 BCE, the Battle of Issus 333 BCE, and the famous Battle of Gaugamela 331 BCE. In Egypt, he was hailed as a liberator, and he founded the city of Alexandria, which would later become one of the most important cultural and intellectual centers of the ancient world. This cultural fusion, known as Hellenization, had a lasting impact on the regions of Alexander's empire. In governance, mixed with Egyptian, Persian, and Indian influences, creating a unique blend of cultures that shaped the development of the ancient world for centuries to come. Despite his conquests, Alexander was not a typical imperialist. In Egypt, for example, he was crowned pharaoh and honored the Egyptian gods. In Persia, he wore Persian royal robes and married a Persian princess, Roxanne, as part of his efforts to unite the Greek and Persian peoples. However, Alexander's empire was short-lived. After his sudden death in 323 BCE, at the age of 32, his vast empire was left without a strong leader, eventually splitting the empire into several Hellenistic kingdoms. These kingdoms, including the Seleucid Empire in the east, the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. Although Alexander's empire fragmented after his death, the impact of his conquests continued to be felt for centuries. The cities he founded, especially Alexandria, became centers of learning and culture, attracting scholars, philosophers, and artists from all over the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria, which housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls and manuscripts, became one of the most famous libraries of the ancient world, a beacon of knowledge and intellectual achievement. The Hellenistic period, which lasted from Alexander's death in 323 BCE until the Roman conquest of the Greek world in 146 BCE, saw the spread of Greek language, art, and philosophy throughout the Mediterranean and Asia. Greek became the lingua franca of much of the ancient world, and Hellenistic art and architecture influenced the development of Roman culture. The philosophy of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics continued to shape the intellectual landscape of the ancient world. And Hellenistic science and mathematics laid the groundwork for future discoveries, though Alexander's empire did not survive intact. His vision of a world united by Greek culture had a profound and lasting influence, one in which the exchange of ideas, art, and knowledge between East and West would continue to shape the future. Alexander's legacy lived on long after his death, influencing the Roman Empire, the rise of Christianity, and even the development of modern Western culture. Following the Hellenistic period, the ancient world entered a new era dominated by the rise of the Roman Empire. Although Rome was geographically distant from Mesopotamia, its influence on the region and the influence of Mesopotamian cultures on Rome was undeniable. By the 1st century BCE, the Romans were expanding their empire into the eastern parts of the Mediterranean, including the regions that had once been part of the Persian Empire and the Seleucid Kingdom, both of which had roots in Mesopotamian culture. The Romans were greatly influenced by the achievements of the civilizations that preceded them, particularly the Greeks and the people of Mesopotamia. For example, the Roman legal system, one of the most influential legacies of the Roman Empire, was heavily inspired by the legal codes of the Babylonians, including the famous Code of Hammurabi. Many of the principles of Roman law, such as property rights and contractual obligations, were drawn from earlier Mesopotamian traditions. The Romans also inherited much of Mesopotamian architectural and engineering knowledge. Roman aqueducts, which supplied water to cities, were inspired by the sophisticated irrigation systems developed by the Sumerians and Babylonians. The use of arches, which became a hallmark of Roman architecture, was also influenced by earlier Mesopotamian building techniques. The Romans adapted these innovations to create structures that were both functional and monumental, including the famous Colosseum and Roman forums. 53 BCE to 217 CE. The Parthian Empire, which rose to power after the fall of the Seleucid Empire, was a major regional power in Mesopotamia, including the ancient city of Babylon, and their empire was a direct rival to Rome's ambitions in the east. The Romans and Parthians clashed over control of key territories, particularly in the regions of Armenia and Mesopotamia, with both empires seeking dominance over this strategically important area. Although the Romans were unable to permanently annex Mesopotamia, their influence on the region remained strong. In the 2nd century CE, under the rule of Emperor Trajan, the Romans successfully captured Mesopotamia for a short time. Trajan's conquest of the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon, located along the Tigris River, symbolized the peak of Roman power in the region. Despite this, the Romans and Parthians continued to maintain diplomatic relations, with both empires exchanging knowledge, culture, and even soldiers. The legacy of Mesopotamian civilizations did not fade away with the rise of the Romans. In fact, Mesopotamian culture continued to influence Roman art, religion, and governance. A Persian god became widespread in the Roman Empire, the cult of Mithras, which focused on the worship of the sun. And cosmic order was one of the most popular mystery religions in the Roman world, particularly among Roman soldiers. The Romans were deeply inspired by the art and sculpture of the Persians and Babylonians. The detailed reliefs and monumental sculptures of Mesopotamian palaces influenced Roman art. Despite the eventual decline of the Roman Empire in the West, in the 5th century CE, its cultural and political influence continued to shape the course of Western civilization. Mesopotamian contributions to law, engineering, religion, art were passed on to future generations through the Romans, ensuring that the legacy of ancient Mesopotamia would live on long after the fall of the great empires of the ancient world. In the aftermath of the fall of the Parthian Empire, a new dynasty emerged in Persia that would become one of the most powerful forces in the ancient world, the Sassanid Empire. The Sassanid Empire 224 CE, 2651 CE, would not only restore Persia to its former glory, but would also become a direct rival to the Roman Empire and its successor, the Byzantine Empire. This period marked a renaissance in Persian culture, art, and governance, with the Sassanid rulers embracing the legacy of the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations while also forging their own distinct identity. The Sassanid Empire was founded by Ardashir the first in 224 CE after he defeated the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, at the Battle of Hormozgan. Ardashir's victory marked the beginning of the Sassanid dynasty, which would rule Persia for over 4 centuries. Under the Sassanids, reclaimed much of the territory lost to the Parthians and re-established the Persian Empire as a dominant force in the region. The capital of the empire was established in Ctesiphon, located on the Tigris River, which had once been the Parthian capital, and would continue to serve as a cultural and political center. The Sassanid rulers were staunch supporters of Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, and they sought to revitalize and promote Zoroastrianism as the state religion. Under the Sassanids, Zoroastrianism experienced a revival, and the religion became deeply intertwined with the identity of the empire. The Sassanid kings, especially Shapur I and Khosrow I, were portrayed as divine protectors of the faith, and the state took a leading role in the construction of fire temples and the establishment of religious schools. Zoroastrianism's influence during the Sassanid period can still be seen today in the religious practices of the Zoroastrian community. The Sassanid Empire also embraced the rich cultural traditions of ancient Mesopotamia. Sassanid rulers adopted many of the artistic and architectural styles of earlier Persian and Mesopotamian empires, particularly the Achaemenid and Parthian periods. The Sasanian period saw the construction of impressive palaces, temples, and fortifications, often adorned with intricate stone carvings and frescoes. The arch, which had been perfected by the Romans, was also widely used in Sassanid architecture, particularly in the construction of monumental structures such as the Tak Khosra, a massive archway that once stood in Ctesiphon and was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. The Sassanids also built a sophisticated system of governance. Like the Babylonians and Persians before them, the Sassanids implemented a decentralized system of provincial rule, with local governors known as satraps administering the various regions of the empire. These satraps were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining law and order, and overseeing military defense. The empire was divided into several provinces, each governed by a high-ranking official who reported directly to the king. This system of governance helped the Sassanids maintain control over their vast empire, which spanned from the eastern Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent. One of the most notable aspects of the Sassanid Empire was its military prowess. The Sassanids built one of the most formidable armies of the ancient world, with highly trained cavalry units and an effective system of military strategy. The Sassanid army was well equipped with armored cavalry and advanced weaponry, including the use of heavily armored war elephants in battle. The Sassanids also made significant contributions to military technology, such as the development of siege engines and advanced fortifications. The empire frequently clashed with the Roman Empire and later the Byzantine Empire, in a series of wars that shaped the political landscape of the Near East. The Sassanid Empire also played a key role in the Silk Road trade. Acting as a bridge between the East and West, Persia was strategically located between the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China, making it an important hub for the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. The Sassanids were able to control the flow of trade along the Silk Road, bringing wealth and prosperity to their empire. Goods, such as silk, spices, and precious metals flowed through Persia, enriching the Sassanid economy and making the empire one of the most powerful in the world. Despite its many achievements, the Sassanid Empire faced numerous challenges. The rise of Islam in the 7th century CE would bring an end to the Sassanid dynasty. In 651 CE, after a series of devastating defeats by the Arab Muslims, the Sassanid Empire fell. The last Sassanid ruler, Yazdegerd III, was defeated at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, and Persia was incorporated into the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate. While the Sassanid Empire was short-lived in comparison to other empires, its legacy endured for centuries. The Sassanid period is remembered as a time of cultural and religious revival as well as military and architectural achievement. Many aspects of Sassanid culture, including Zoroastrianism, art, and governance, influenced the Islamic world and were passed down through the ages. The Sassanids played a crucial role in preserving the rich history and traditions of Mesopotamia and Persia, ensuring that their influence would continue to shape the future of the region long after their empire had fallen. In the 7th century CE, the world saw a transformative shift that would forever change the course of history. The rise of Islam and the rapid expansion of the Islamic caliphates marked the end of the ancient empires of Mesopotamia, including the Sassanid Empire, and introduced a new political and cultural force to the region. The spread of Islam, led by the Prophet Muhammad and his successors, brought profound changes to the lands that once housed the great civilizations of Sumer, Babylon, and Persia. The Islamic conquests began shortly after the death of Muhammad in 632 CE. Under the leadership of the Rashidun caliphs, the Islamic armies rapidly expanded. First into the Arabian Peninsula, and then across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. In 651 CE, the Islamic forces decisively defeated the Sassanid Empire at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Persia, including Mesopotamia, became part of the Islamic Caliphate. This marked the end of over 2 millennia of Persian dominance in the region, and the beginning of a new era under Islamic rule. The transformation of Mesopotamia under the Islamic caliphates was profound. In the early years of Islamic rule, the region's ancient structures, such as the Ziggurats of Mesopotamia, were gradually abandoned or repurposed for new Islamic uses. Cities like Ctesiphon, once the grand capital of the Sassanid Empire, began to decline in importance, while new cities like Baghdad rose to prominence. Founded in 762 CE by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur, Baghdad became the new capital of the Islamic Caliphate and soon grew into one of the most important cultural, intellectual, and economic centers in the Islamic world. The Abbasid Caliphate, which ruled from 750 CE to 1258 CE, is considered a golden age for the Islamic world. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad became a hub for scholars, scientists, philosophers, and artists from across the Muslim world and beyond. The House of Wisdom, a famous intellectual center in Baghdad, was established as a place for scholars to gather, translate ancient texts, and make groundbreaking advances in fields such as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Many of the works of Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars were translated into Arabic, preserving the knowledge of earlier civilizations and contributing to the development of new scientific ideas. The Islamic transformation of Mesopotamia also brought significant religious and cultural changes to the region. Islam, with its emphasis on monotheism and its Quranic teachings, became the dominant faith in Mesopotamia. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Judaism, which had all coexisted in the region for centuries, saw their influence diminish as Islam spread. However, the Islamic caliphates were generally tolerant of religious minorities, allowing them to practice their faiths under the condition of paying a special tax known as the jizya. One of the most lasting legacies of the Islamic caliphates in Mesopotamia was the development of a sophisticated legal and administrative system based on Islamic law, or Sharia. This system provided a framework for governance and justice that would influence the region for centuries to come. Islamic scholars also made significant contributions to legal theory, philosophy, and ethics, with many of their writings becoming foundational texts for Islamic jurisprudence. The Abbasid period also saw advancements in trade and economics, as the Islamic Empire's vast network of trade routes connected the Middle East to Europe, Africa, and Asia. The region's cities, especially Baghdad, became thriving centers of commerce. Goods such as textiles, spices, and precious metals flowed through Mesopotamia, linking the region to the wider world. The development of new agricultural techniques, including the use of irrigation, also helped to boost agricultural productivity in Mesopotamia, allowing the population to grow and urbanize. However, the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate began to decline in the 9th century CE. The empire suffered from internal strife, political instability, and the rise of powerful regional governors. In 1258 CE, the Abbasid Caliphate came to a tragic end when the Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, sacked Baghdad and destroyed much of the city, including the House of Wisdom. This marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate's reign and the beginning of a period of Mongol domination in the region. Despite the fall of the Abbasids, the legacy of the Islamic caliphates in Mesopotamia lived on. The Islamic period brought significant changes to the cultural, religious, and political landscape of the region. And the impact of Islamic civilization continues to shape Mesopotamia and the broader Middle East to this day. From the flourishing intellectual and cultural achievements of the Abbasid period to the spread of Islam, the Islamic caliphates transformed Mesopotamia in ways that would define the region for centuries to come. The 13th century CE brought one of the most catastrophic events in the history of Mesopotamia, the Mongol invasion. Led by the infamous Genghis Khan and his descendants, the Mongols swept through the Middle East, leaving destruction and chaos in their wake. The Mongol invasion marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age in Mesopotamia and the beginning of a new era of Mongol rule that would shape the future of the region. The Mongols were a nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia who had been united under the leadership of Genghis Khan in the early 13th century. Genghis Khan, whose birth name was Temujin, became one of the most feared military leaders in history due to his ability to unite disparate tribes and organize a highly disciplined and efficient army. The Mongols were known for their cavalry, particularly their mounted archers, who could strike with deadly accuracy from a distance. In 1219 CE, after a series of diplomatic disputes, Genghis Khan launched a full-scale invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, which included parts of modern-day Iran, Central Asia, and Mesopotamia. The Mongols rapidly advanced, capturing city after city, including the important trading center of Samarkand. Their success was largely due to their use of psychological warfare and ruthless tactics, including mass executions and the complete destruction of cities that resisted Mongol rule. The Mongols eventually turned their attention to the Abbasid Caliphate in Mesopotamia. In 1258 CE, after a protracted siege, the Mongols captured Baghdad, the great capital of the Islamic world. The city, which had once been a beacon of knowledge and culture, was sacked and devastated. The Caliph, al-Musta'sim, was executed, and much of the city was destroyed. The loss of Baghdad marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Islamic Golden Age in Mesopotamia. The Mongols killed thousands of residents, looted the city, and burned down libraries, including the House of Wisdom, which housed irreplaceable manuscripts and knowledge. The destruction of Baghdad was a turning point for the Islamic world. It represented the end of a thriving intellectual and cultural center and the beginning of a period of instability and fragmentation. However, the Mongols were not only destroyers, they were also effective administrators. After Genghis Khan's death, his successors, most notably his grandson Hulagu Khan, established the Ilkhanate in Persia and Mesopotamia. The Ilkhanate was a Mongol state that ruled over the former territories of the Abbasid Caliphate, including Mesopotamia, until the mid-14th century. Despite their violent conquest, the Mongols were influenced by the cultures they encountered, including the Islamic world. Hulagu Khan himself became a patron of Islamic culture, commissioning the construction of mosques and supporting Islamic scholars. Over time, many Mongols in the Ilkhanate converted to Islam, and Persian became the dominant language of the region. While the Mongol invasion had ended the Islamic Golden Age, the legacy of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Islamic intellectual tradition continued to influence the region. The Mongol Empire, which at its height spanned much of Asia and Europe, eventually fragmented into smaller khanates. In Mesopotamia, the Ilkhanate ruled for over a century until it was weakened by internal strife and external threats. In the 14th century, the Ilkhanate was absorbed into the Timurid Empire, which was founded by the Central Asian conqueror Timur Tamerlane. Timur's empire, though short-lived, would leave its own mark on the region. Continuing the tradition of Persianate culture and art in Mesopotamia, the Mongol invasion, though devastating, also led to the exchange of ideas, goods, and technologies across vast regions of Asia. The Mongols facilitated trade along the Silk Road, connecting the East and West and opening up new avenues for cultural exchange. In many ways, the Mongol Empire laid the foundation for the modern world by creating a network of interconnected civilizations. Despite the horrors of the invasion, the Mongols' rule in Mesopotamia marked a new chapter in the region's history. The city of Baghdad would eventually recover, though never to its former glory. Over time, new powers would rise in the region, including the Safavids, the Ottomans, and the Arabs of the Islamic world. But the memory of the Mongol invasion would remain as a symbol of both destruction and transformation, forever altering the course of Mesopotamian history. The 15th century CE witnessed the rise of a new and powerful empire that would dominate much of the Middle East, including Mesopotamia, the Ottoman Empire. Founded by Osman I in 1299, the Ottomans would expand rapidly, eventually controlling vast territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Their reign over Mesopotamia began in the 16th century and marked the final chapter in the region's long history of changing rulers. The Ottomans would rule Mesopotamia for over 400 years, leaving an indelible mark on its culture, politics, and society. The Ottoman Empire was a highly centralized state, built around a strong military and a system of governance that allowed for the administration of a diverse and multi-ethnic population. The Ottomans were originally a Turkish-speaking people from Central Asia who had embraced Islam and established their own state in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Over time, they expanded their empire through a combination of military conquest, alliances, and diplomacy. By the early 16th century, the Ottomans had expanded their empire into the heart of the Middle East, including Mesopotamia. In 1534, the Ottomans captured Baghdad from the Safavids, a rival Persian dynasty, and incorporated the city into their empire. The Ottomans divided Mesopotamia into provinces, governed by local officials known as pashas. Baghdad, as a provincial capital, became an important administrative and cultural center within the empire. Under Ottoman rule, Mesopotamia experienced a period of relative stability, particularly during the early centuries of Ottoman control. The Ottomans built roads, bridges, and infrastructure that improved trade and communication across the region. The imperial system allowed for the collection of taxes and the maintenance of law and order, ensuring that the region could function efficiently as part of the vast Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans also introduced new forms of architecture, art, and culture to Mesopotamia. They constructed mosques, palaces, and bazaars in the traditional Ottoman style. With intricate tilework, domed roofs, and expansive courtyards, the Ottomans were also patrons of the arts, commissioning works of literature, music, and calligraphy that would influence Mesopotamian culture for centuries. While the Ottomans embraced Islam as the state religion, they were generally tolerant of the religious and ethnic diversity in the region, which included Sunni and Shia Muslims, as well as Christians and Jews. However, Ottoman rule was not without its challenges. Mesopotamia, especially its southern region, faced frequent unrest due to a combination of internal and external pressures. The Ottomans had to contend with periodic uprisings from local Arab and Kurdish tribes, as well as incursions from the Persians to the east. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the region also saw the rise of local dynasties, such as the Mamluks, who sought greater autonomy from the central Ottoman government. The 19th century brought further complications for the Ottoman Empire. As it began to weaken and lose territories to European powers, the rise of nationalism among the peoples of the Middle East, along with the growing influence of Britain, France, and Russia in the region, undermined Ottoman authority. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Ottoman Empire had begun to fragment, and its grip on Mesopotamia weakened. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, the Ottoman Empire sided with the Central Powers against the Allied powers. The war was disastrous for the Ottomans, and by the end of the conflict, the empire was on the verge of collapse. In 1917, British forces captured Baghdad, and the Ottoman Empire lost control of Mesopotamia. In 1920, following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate to govern Mesopotamia, leading to the creation of the modern state of Iraq. The Ottoman legacy in Mesopotamia is still visible today. The architectural and cultural contributions of the Ottomans helped shape the region's identity, and their system of governance laid the foundation for the later development of modern Iraq. The Ottomans also influenced the region's religious and social dynamics, as their policies of tolerance allowed for the coexistence of diverse religious and ethnic communities. Despite the eventual decline of the Ottoman Empire, the impact of Ottoman rule in Mesopotamia remains an integral part of the region's history. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the aftermath of World War I, Mesopotamia, once a key region within the empire, entered a new phase of foreign control. Not in 1920, the League of Nations awarded Britain the mandate to govern Mesopotamia, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the region's history. This period of British rule would have a lasting impact on Mesopotamia, shaping the political, social, and cultural landscape of the region for decades to come. The creation of modern Iraq, a nation born out of the ashes of ancient Mesopotamia, would be heavily influenced by Britain's policies and decisions during the Mandate period. The British Mandate in Mesopotamia was formalized in 1920. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, the Treaty of Sèvres 1920 and the subsequent Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 officially dismantled the Ottoman Empire. Mesopotamia was placed under British control as part of the post-war settlement. British officials and military forces quickly took control of the region, and the British began the process of shaping Mesopotamia into a modern state. Baghdad, once a grand capital under the Abbasid Caliphate, became the focal point of British governance. The British faced significant resistance from the local population, particularly from the Arab and Kurdish communities who were unhappy with the imposition of foreign rule. In 1920, an uprising known as the Iraqi Revolt broke out, with tribes, nationalists, and religious groups rising up against British authority. The revolt was suppressed, but it highlighted the deep dissatisfaction with British control and the desire for independence. In an effort to quell the unrest and provide a sense of local leadership, the British installed Faisal I, a member of the Hashemite family, as the King of Iraq in 1921. Faisal had previously been a leader of the Arab Revolt during World War I, which had been supported by the British in their fight against the Ottoman Empire. Although Faisal was seen by some as a symbol of Arab unity and independence, his reign was largely under British influence, as the British retained control over Iraq's military and foreign policy. Despite this, Faisal worked to modernize Iraq, establishing a national government and encouraging economic development. In 1932, Iraq officially gained independence from Britain. Although the British influence remained strong, particularly in the areas of military and oil production, the British had long been interested in Iraq's oil reserves, which were some of the richest in the world. And they continued to have significant control over Iraq's oil industry through the Iraq Petroleum Company, a joint British and American venture. The presence of foreign oil interests in Iraq would later become a source of tension, as nationalists and later Iraqi leaders sought to gain full control over their natural resources. The creation of modern Iraq, shaped by the British Mandate, also brought together three distinct regions: Sunni majority, Central Iraq; Shiite majority, Southern Iraq; and Kurdish majority, Northern Iraq. This artificial political structure sowed the seeds of future ethnic and sectarian tensions in the country. The Kurds, in particular, resisted the central government in Baghdad, seeking autonomy and self-rule. The Shiite population, which felt marginalized, also faced difficulties under the Sunni-dominated monarchy and later governments. These internal divisions would continue to play a key role in Iraq's political landscape for decades to come. Under British rule, Iraq's education system, infrastructure, and military were modernized, but the country's political system remained largely dependent on British support. The British Mandate era laid the foundation for Iraq's future development, but it also left a legacy of conflict, nationalism, and a desire for greater independence. The question of national identity and sovereignty would continue to haunt Iraq long. After its formal independence in 1932, the British Mandate and the creation of Iraq also had a broader impact on the Middle East. The arbitrary borders drawn by European powers, including the division of Mesopotamia into modern Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, created tensions between ethnic and religious groups. These borders often ignored the historical, cultural, and linguistic divisions that had existed for centuries, leading to conflict and instability that would persist throughout the 20th century and beyond. The legacy of British control over Mesopotamia and the creation of modern Iraq continues to shape the region's history today. The challenges faced by Iraq during the British Mandate era set the stage for the struggles of the 20th century, including the rise of nationalism, the quest for control over oil resources, and the internal ethnic and sectarian conflicts that would come to define Iraq's modern history. The early 20th century in Iraq was marked by significant political change, especially following the country's formal independence from Britain in 1932. Despite the promise of autonomy, the legacy of British influence remained strong, and Iraq continued to be a battleground for competing political forces. Nationalism began to take root, and the desire for self-determination, free from foreign influence, intensified among various groups within the country. This period saw the gradual decline of the monarchy and the rise of new political ideologies that would shape Iraq's future. Following the abdication of British control in 1932, Iraq was ruled by King Faisal I, who was installed by the British in 1921. Faisal I's reign marked the beginning of Iraq's transition into a modern state. But his leadership was overshadowed by the lingering influence of Britain and the country's internal divisions. Despite his efforts to modernize Iraq and build a national identity, Faisal I faced significant challenges, including the tensions between Iraq's Sunni, Shiite, and Kurdish populations, as well as the country's dependence on foreign oil interests, primarily British. The monarchy's inability to fully sever ties with Britain and address the growing nationalism led to widespread dissatisfaction, particularly among the country's nationalist groups. These groups, including left-wing political parties and military officers, began calling for greater sovereignty and a reduction of British influence. Tensions also flared between Iraq's Sunni-dominated government and the Shiite majority, which felt politically marginalized. In 1939, King Faisal I died and was succeeded by his son, King Ghazi. Ghazi's reign was short-lived and marked by increasing political instability. Ghazi, who was young and inexperienced, was less able to control the various factions vying for power. Additionally, the rise of radical nationalist movements, including those influenced by Arab nationalism and the rise of fascism in Europe, further challenged the monarchy's authority. One of the key events during Ghazi's reign was Iraq's alignment with Nazi Germany during World War II. The political climate in Iraq was strongly influenced by the broader Arab nationalist movements, which were becoming more sympathetic to the Axis powers, partly due to British colonialism and the lingering effects of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The Iraqis saw their relationship with Britain as one of exploitation, particularly regarding the control over Iraq's vast oil resources. In 1941, a pro-Axis coup took place in Iraq, and the new government, led by Rashid Ali al-Gilani, attempted to align with Nazi Germany. However, British forces swiftly intervened, and after a brief but intense military confrontation, the British restored the pro-British government. King Ghazi died under mysterious circumstances in 1939, and his young son, Faisal II, ascended to the throne. However, the monarchy's power was increasingly challenged. As Iraqi nationalists grew more vocal in their demands for full independence, the country's political landscape was shifting, with military coups and political unrest becoming more common. By the 1950s, the call for the abdication of the monarchy was gaining momentum, particularly among the younger generations who were influenced by the growing tide of Arab nationalism and anti-colonial sentiments. In 1958, after years of political instability and dissatisfaction with the monarchy, a military coup led by General Abdul Karim Kazim overthrew the monarchy and declared the establishment of the Iraqi Republic. Faisal II and the royal family were executed, marking the end of over 30 years of Hashemite rule in Iraq. The revolution was driven by a mix of nationalist, socialist, and Arab nationalist ideologies, and it was largely supported by the country's army and urban population. The coup was a direct result of growing dissatisfaction with the monarchy's inability to deal with Iraq's political, economic, and social issues, as well as its continued ties with foreign powers. The rise of nationalism and the abdication of the monarchy marked a new chapter in Iraq's history. The military coup of 1958 effectively ended Iraq's Hashemite monarchy. The creation of the Iraqi Republic set the stage for a new era of governance, one that would be shaped by military leaders and the push for modernization. However, the overthrow of the monarchy did not bring stability to the country. Instead, Iraq entered a period of political turmoil and military dictatorship, and the seeds of future conflicts, both internal and with neighboring countries, were sown. While the abdication of the monarchy marked the end of a particular political era, it also set in motion the forces that would drive Iraq's development in the 20th century. The country's transition from monarchy to republic would lead to several changes in Iraq's foreign policy, especially as Iraq sought to assert its sovereignty on the international stage. However, the instability caused by military coups, political factions, and ideological movements would continue to challenge Iraq for decades to come. Iraq experienced a period of political instability, with various military regimes and ideological movements vying for control of the country. Among the most influential of these movements was the Ba'ath Party, a Pan-Arab nationalist and socialist political party that would eventually come to dominate Iraq's political landscape. The rise of the Ba'ath Party and its leader, Saddam Hussein. The Ba'ath Party, founded in Syria in 1947 by Michel Aflaq and Salah al-Din al-Bidr, espoused a vision of Arab unity, socialism, and anti-colonialism. The party sought to unite the Arab world under a single socialist banner and was deeply influenced by the ideas of Arab nationalism. In Iraq, the Ba'ath Party gained significant support during the 1950s and 1960s, particularly among the military and intellectual elites. The Ba'ath Party's return to power in Iraq came in 1968 when a coup led by Ba'athist officers, including Saddam Hussein, overthrew the government of President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. Although al-Bakr remained president, it was Saddam who served as vice president, who held the real power. Over the next several years, Saddam began to eliminate his rivals within the party and the government, ultimately taking control of Iraq in 1979 when al-Bakr resigned. Saddam Hussein's rise to power marked the beginning of a brutal and authoritarian regime that would last for more than 2 decades. Saddam implemented a series of political, social, and economic reforms designed to solidify his control over Iraq. He centralized power in the hands of the ruling elite, using fear, intimidation, and repression to maintain order. Saddam's regime was characterized by a cult of personality, Saddam presenting himself as the protector of Iraq and the champion of Arab nationalism. His image was prominently displayed throughout the country. His speeches were broadcast widely, often portraying him as a larger-than-life figure destined to lead Iraq to greatness. One of Saddam's first major actions was the nationalization of Iraq's oil industry. Oil had been a major source of wealth for Iraq since the 1950s. Saddam sought to ensure that the profits from oil would benefit the Iraqi people. He used the revenues from oil exports to fund infrastructure projects, military spending, and social welfare programs. But much of the wealth remained concentrated in the hands of the government and its elite supporters. Saddam also implemented large-scale development projects. In an effort to modernize Iraq's economy and infrastructure, despite the promises of development and modernization, Saddam's regime was marked by widespread human rights abuses, with Saddam's secret police using torture, imprisonment, and executions to silence dissent, particularly the Kurds and the Shiite Arabs, with violent repression, during which thousands of Kurds were killed and entire villages were destroyed as part of a genocidal campaign against the Kurdish population. He sought to expand Iraq's influence in the region, beginning the year-long Iran-Iraq War. The war ended in 1988 with no decisive victor, but it left Iraq economically weakened and politically isolated. The war resulted in heavy casualties for Iraq and left the country facing severe economic sanctions. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Saddam Hussein's regime continued to rely on brutal repression and propaganda to maintain its hold on power, and the country's infrastructure began to deteriorate. Despite his efforts to present Iraq as a regional power, Saddam's regime was increasingly seen as a pariah state. In many countries, including the United States, viewed him as a threat to regional stability. Saddam Hussein's rule finally came to an end in 2003 when the United States under President George W. Bush led an invasion of Iraq, citing Saddam's alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and his ties to terrorism as the main justifications. The invasion quickly toppled Saddam's government, and he was eventually captured, tried, and executed for crimes against humanity. The legacy of Saddam Hussein's rule is one of tyranny, violence, and repression. While Iraq did see some modernization under his regime, it came at a great cost in terms of human lives and personal freedoms. The political instability, sectarianism, and violence that followed Saddam's fall continue to affect Iraq to this day. The fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003 marked a turning point in Iraq's history, but it also ushered in a new era of uncertainty and conflict. The US-led invasion of Iraq, launched under the leadership of President George W. Bush, was justified by claims that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and posed a significant threat to regional and global security. However, the aftermath of the invasion was far more complex than anticipated. Iraq, once a powerful nation under Saddam, now found itself in a state of turmoil. as the power vacuum left by Saddam's removal sparked sectarian violence, insurgencies, and instability that would shape the country for years to come. The invasion of Iraq began in March 2003 with a military campaign known as Shock and Awe, which aimed to quickly disable Iraq's military and government infrastructure. Within weeks, Baghdad fell, and Saddam Hussein's regime was overthrown. Saddam himself was captured later that year, tried for crimes against humanity, and executed in 2006. The speed of the military victory, however, was not matched by success in securing the country and rebuilding its institutions. One of the most immediate and significant challenges following the invasion was the dissolution of the Iraqi state. The U.S. and coalition forces dismantled the Iraqi military and banned members of Saddam's Ba'ath Party from holding public office. While these actions were intended to remove Saddam loyalists from power, they left Iraq without a functioning government and created a power vacuum. The removal of Iraq's military and government infrastructure led to widespread chaos, looting, and the collapse of law and order, making it easier for insurgent groups and militias to gain influence. As the security situation deteriorated, sectarian violence between Iraq's Sunni and Shiite populations escalated. Under Saddam, the Sunni minority had held political and military power, while the Shiite majority had been politically marginalized. After Saddam's fall, the Shiites, empowered by their majority status, all sought greater political influence, leading to tensions between the two groups. The Sunni insurgency, including groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, fought against the Shiite-led government, resulting in a brutal sectarian civil war that caused tens of thousands of deaths. The U.S. military, along with Iraqi security forces, struggled to contain the violence. Efforts to rebuild Iraq's political system and infrastructure were complicated by the deep divisions between Iraq's various ethnic and sectarian groups. While the U.S. aimed to establish a democratic government in Iraq, the country's political landscape remained fragmented, and corruption within the Iraqi government further hindered progress. The Iraqi government, led by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who took office in 2006, faced growing challenges in maintaining control. Al-Maliki, a Shiite, was accused of favoring his own sect while alienating the Sunnis, further inflaming sectarian tensions. Despite the formation of a new democratic government and elections, Iraq's political system was unstable, and the country struggled to achieve national reconciliation. The situation in Iraq worsened when the Islamic State ISIS, a radical Sunni extremist group, seized large parts of northern and western Iraq in 2014. The rise of ISIS was partly a result of the U.S. invasion and the subsequent destabilization of Iraq, as well as the group's ability to exploit the sectarian divisions and the marginalization of Sunnis in the government. ISIS's brutal campaign of violence, including mass killings, executions, and the destruction of cultural and religious sites, marked one of the darkest chapters in Iraq's modern history. The U.S. and Iraqi forces, with support from international allies, launched a major military campaign to defeat ISIS, culminating in the recapture of Mosul in 2017. While the defeat of ISIS was a significant achievement, the damage done to Iraq, both in terms of lives lost and the destruction of infrastructure, was immense. The rise of ISIS left deep scars in Iraq, and the country's future remained uncertain. In the years following the defeat of ISIS, Iraq faced the difficult task of rebuilding and recovering from years of conflict. The economy, heavily dependent on oil exports, suffered from fluctuating oil prices, and Iraq's infrastructure was in ruins. The government struggled to provide basic services such as electricity, water, and healthcare to its citizens. Corruption within the political system continued to undermine efforts to rebuild the country, and many Iraqis felt disillusioned with the political class. Iraq's Kurdish population, based in the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region in the north, also faced challenges. In 2017, the Kurds held an independence referendum, seeking to break away from Iraq and form their own independent state. The Iraqi government rejected the referendum, and tensions between the Kurds and Baghdad escalated, leading to military clashes and further division. Despite these challenges, Iraq's political landscape began to shift in the 2020s. Protests against government corruption and poor living conditions erupted in Baghdad and other cities in 2019. With Iraqis demanding reforms and a change in leadership, the government responded with violence. but the protests highlighted the growing frustration with Iraq's political elite. In 2020, Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi was appointed, and he faced the task of addressing the country's many challenges, including economic recovery, security, and political reform. Today, Iraq remains a country in transition, dealing with the legacies of Saddam Hussein's brutal regime, the aftermath of the U.S. invasion, and the ongoing challenges of sectarian violence, political instability, and corruption. While the country has made progress in rebuilding its infrastructure and institutions, the path to stability and prosperity remains uncertain. Iraq's future will depend on its ability to overcome its divisions, build a more inclusive government, and address the needs of its people. The 21st century has been a tumultuous time for Iraq. Shaped by the aftermath of the U.S. invasion, the rise of extremism, and the ongoing struggles for political, economic, and social stability, while Iraq has made some progress in rebuilding its institutions and economy, the country remains mired in deep political divisions, sectarian tensions, and the challenges of recovery after decades of war and violence. The road to recovery has been slow, and Iraq continues to face obstacles in its quest for lasting peace, prosperity, and unity. One of the key challenges facing Iraq in the 21st century is the question of governance. The post-Saddam political system, designed with the intention of fostering democracy, has been marked by deep sectarian divides between the Shiite majority, Sunni minority, and Kurdish population. The fragmentation of Iraq's political landscape, coupled with widespread corruption and inefficiency, has hindered the development of a stable and functional government. Efforts to build national unity have been stymied by competing interests, with politicians often prioritizing sectarian loyalty over the needs of the country as a whole. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq has witnessed a series of transitions in leadership, some governments attempting to make progress on reforms, but none managing to fully address the country's deep-seated issues. The political elite, particularly in the wake of the rise of ISIS, has often been accused of corruption and inefficiency. In 2019, mass protests erupted across Iraq, especially in Baghdad and the southern regions, as Iraqis expressed frustration with the government's inability to deliver basic services, tackle corruption, and provide employment opportunities. The protests called for political reform and greater accountability, and although they led to some changes, including the resignation of Prime Minister Adel Abdul-Mahdi, many Iraqis feel that their voices have not been fully heard. The rise of ISIS in 2014 marked another dark chapter in Iraq's history. The extremist group, which seized large swaths of Iraq and Syria, exploited the country's sectarian divisions and instability to establish a self-declared caliphate. The brutality of ISIS, which included mass executions, religious persecution, and the destruction of cultural heritage sites, shocked the world and led to widespread suffering in Iraq. The U.S.-led coalition, along with Iraqi forces, launched a massive military campaign to defeat ISIS, culminating in the liberation of Mosul in 2017. While the defeat of ISIS was a significant victory, the group's impact on Iraq's political and social fabric remains profound. With many parts of the country still dealing with the consequences of the war, the devastation caused by the ISIS conflict and years of warfare left Iraq with a broken economy and crumbling infrastructure. The oil sector, which had long been the backbone of Iraq's economy, suffered from years of underinvestment, corruption, and instability. The economic challenges have been compounded by fluctuating global oil prices, which have made it difficult for Iraq to achieve sustainable growth. Despite Iraq's vast oil reserves, much of the population remains in poverty. Basic services like healthcare, education, electricity, and clean water are often inadequate, especially in rural areas and conflict zones. In addition to economic challenges, Iraq faces significant security concerns. While the Iraqi military has regained control of much of the country from ISIS, the threat of terrorism and insurgency remains. Militias, some of which are backed by foreign powers like Iran, have become increasingly influential in Iraq, further complicating the security landscape. These militias often operate outside of the control of the central government, undermining Iraq's sovereignty and contributing to instability. The ongoing presence of these armed groups, along with the continued threat of ISIS insurgents, has made it difficult for Iraq to fully secure its borders and maintain order within the country. The Kurdish issue remains another major challenge for Iraq. The Kurdish region, located in northern Iraq, has long sought greater autonomy and at times independence. The Kurdish people, who are ethnically distinct from the Arabs and speak their own language, have maintained a semi-autonomous government since the 1990s. But tensions with the central government in Baghdad continue to simmer. In 2017, the Kurdish regional government KRG held an independence referendum, which was met with fierce opposition from Baghdad, leading to military clashes and a deterioration in relations. While the KRG has enjoyed relative stability compared to other parts of Iraq, the Kurdish issue remains unresolved, and the question of Kurdish autonomy or independence continues to be a source of tension. Iraq's recovery in the 21st century will depend on several factors. First and foremost, the country will need to address its political divisions and establish a government that represents all Iraqis, regardless of sect, ethnicity, or political affiliation. The government will also need to confront corruption, strengthen rule of law, and ensure that state institutions are capable of delivering services to the people. Second, Iraq must rebuild its economy, diversifying away from oil dependence and investing in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Finally, Iraq will need to tackle its security challenges, disarm militias, and strengthen the rule of law to ensure that the country is safe and secure for all its citizens. The road to stability and prosperity in Iraq will be long and difficult, but it is not impossible. The resilience of the Iraqi people, who have endured years of war, occupation, and violence, will be a crucial factor in Iraq's future success. The international community, too, has a role to play in supporting Iraq's recovery. While Iraq's journey toward peace and prosperity will require time, patience, and perseverance, the hope remains that the country can overcome its challenges and emerge as a stable and thriving state in the heart of the Middle East. As Iraq moves forward in its recovery from years of war, insurgency, and foreign intervention, its role in the broader Middle East and the world remains a critical issue. Iraq's geopolitical position at the crossroads of the Arab world, Iran, and Turkey gives it both strategic importance and significant challenges. Over the centuries, Iraq has been the focal point of power struggles between empires, including the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and modern Western powers. In the 21st century, Iraq continues to play a central role in the region, and its future will have far-reaching implications for the stability and security of the entire Middle East. The U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, followed by the subsequent insurgency, sectarian violence, and rise of extremist groups like ISIS, reshaped Iraq's position in the region. Iraq's relationship with its neighbors, particularly Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, is marked by a mix of cooperation, rivalry, and competition for influence. Iraq's Sunni-Shiite divide, combined with regional tensions, complicates its foreign policy and national security, shaped by both historical factors and contemporary political realities. Since the 2003 U.S. invasion, Iraq's Shiite majority has grown increasingly aligned with Iran. Given the shared religious and cultural ties, Iran's influence in Iraq has grown significantly, particularly through its support for Shiite militias and political factions. Iran has become a key player in Iraq's political landscape, and it has provided support to the Iraqi government in its fight against ISIS. However, this relationship is not without tension. Many Iraqis, particularly in the Sunni majority areas, and among secular factions, view Iran's influence as an encroachment on Iraq's sovereignty, has led to concerns about the growing power of non-state actors in the country. The Iraqi government, while deeply influenced by Tehran, has worked to balance its relationship with Iran with its ties to the broader Arab world and the West. Iraq's prime ministers have occasionally attempted to play a diplomatic balancing act, seeking to avoid complete dependence on either Iran or Saudi Arabia. However, the country's sectarian makeup and its Shiite-dominated government have made this task challenging. Iraq and Saudi Arabia, rivalry and competition for regional influence. Saudi Arabia, Iraq's neighbor to the west, has long viewed Iran as a regional rival. The Sunni-majority kingdom, which has significant political, economic, and religious influence in the Arab world, has been wary of Iraq's growing ties with Iran. Saudi Arabia has historically supported Sunni factions in Iraq, particularly during the post-Saddam era, when the Shiite-dominated government was coming to power. Iraq's alignment with Iran has strained its relationship with Saudi Arabia, but in recent years there have been efforts to restore ties. The growing concern over Iran's influence in the region has led both Iraq and Saudi Arabia to seek better relations. As both countries are interested in regional stability and economic cooperation, Saudi Arabia has provided Iraq with economic assistance and investments, hoping to strengthen the relationship and counterbalance Iran's influence. The two countries have worked together to improve trade, security cooperation, and diplomatic dialogue. Despite these efforts, tensions over sectarian divides, regional rivalries, and differing political interests continue to pose challenges to a more stable relationship. Iraq and Turkey: economic and security concerns. Iraq's relationship with Turkey is also an important aspect of its foreign policy. Turkey shares a border with northern Iraq, and the Kurdish issue has been a key point of tension between the two countries. The Kurdistan region of Iraq, KRG, in northern Iraq, has sought greater autonomy and, at times, independence, which has led to friction with Baghdad. Turkey, which has its own Kurdish minority, views Kurdish separatism as a threat to its territorial integrity, both to fight Kurdish separatist groups, like the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK, and to maintain influence over Iraq's Kurdish region. Turkey's military presence in northern Iraq has been a source of tension between the two countries, with Iraq occasionally accusing Turkey of violating its sovereignty. At the same time, Turkey has economic interests in Iraq, particularly in the oil and gas sector. The KRG's control over northern Iraq's oil reserves has led to a complex relationship with Turkey. Turkey has also been an important trade partner for Iraq, particularly in areas such as construction, energy, and manufacturing. Iraq's role in the Arab world and the global community. Iraq's position in the Arab world remains significant, particularly given its historical role as a cradle of Arab civilization.
However,
the country's sectarian divisions and political instability have often hindered its ability to fully integrate into the broader Arab political and economic landscape. Iraq's relations with the Arab League have been strained, particularly after the 2003 invasion, when Iraq was excluded from many regional initiatives. In recent years, Iraq has sought to rebuild its ties with the Arab world, such as Jordan and Egypt, reflect its desire to strengthen its role in the region. Iraq's membership in the Arab League provides it with a platform to engage in regional discussions and play a role in addressing issues such as security, economic development, and cooperation on counter-terrorism efforts. On the global stage, Iraq's strategic position as a major oil producer gives it influence in the energy markets. Iraq holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and its oil exports are critical to global energy supplies. Iraq's relationship with the United States and other Western powers, while complex, remains important. The U.S. continues to have military and diplomatic interests in Iraq, particularly in terms of counter-terrorism efforts and regional security. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime in 2003, Iraq has faced numerous challenges in its efforts to rebuild and modernize its economy and infrastructure. Decades of war, sanctions, and mismanagement had left Iraq with a weakened economy, destroyed infrastructure, and widespread poverty. Further exacerbated these issues, leaving the country with a massive reconstruction task. Despite the challenges, Iraq has made progress in some areas, but its economic recovery remains fragile, and the road to rebuilding remains long and complex. The state of Iraq's economy post-Saddam. Iraq's economy is heavily dependent on oil, which accounts for nearly 90% of the country's revenue. The country holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and oil exports are the lifeblood of its economy. However, the oil industry has faced significant setbacks due to years of underinvestment, corruption, and the effects of conflict. The decline in global oil prices and the damage caused by the war with ISIS also hit Iraq's economy hard, contributing to widespread unemployment and poverty. One of the major hurdles to Iraq's economic recovery is the lack of economic diversification. The country's reliance on oil has left it vulnerable to fluctuations in oil prices. And without a diversified economy, Iraq's future economic stability is at risk. Attempts to diversify the economy have been slow and hindered by corruption, political instability, and an insufficiently developed private sector. Agriculture, manufacturing, and other non-oil industries have not been able to take off at the scale needed to replace Iraq's dependence on oil. Rebuilding Iraq's infrastructure, which was once one of the most developed in the Arab world, was severely damaged during years of conflict. And the rise of ISIS left cities like Baghdad, Mosul, and Fallujah in ruins. Roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and utilities were destroyed or severely damaged, and the country's energy sector has struggled to meet demand. The electricity sector, in particular, has been a major source of frustration for Iraqis. Despite substantial oil reserves, Iraq has faced chronic power shortages. With many areas experiencing electricity outages for several hours each day, the government has made efforts to rebuild and expand the energy sector. But progress has been slowed due to a lack of investment, corruption, and the need for modernization. The country still faces significant energy shortages, and many Iraqis continue to rely on expensive private generators. In areas liberated from ISIS, the rebuilding process has been especially challenging, as entire neighborhoods were destroyed and essential services were wiped out. The government, with the support of international aid and reconstruction funds, has made progress in rebuilding some areas, but the scale of the destruction means that recovery will take many years. One of the most significant barriers to Iraq's economic recovery and infrastructure development is corruption. Corruption has been a persistent problem in Iraq since the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime. Political factions, militias, and government officials have often exploited their positions for personal gain. Corruption has also plagued Iraq's oil sector, with reports of embezzlement, bribery, and kickbacks. Has instead been a source of political conflict and mismanagement. International companies, who are key partners in Iraq's oil industry, have also faced challenges due to the lack of transparency and stability in the country. Efforts to combat corruption have been limited, but some progress has been made under recent leaders. In 2020, Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who was appointed after widespread protests against the previous government, promised to tackle corruption and improve governance. The role of foreign aid and investment have played a crucial role in Iraq's reconstruction. Following the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq received billions of dollars in aid from the United States, the European Union, and other international donors. These funds were intended to support Iraq's rebuilding efforts, but much of the aid was diverted due to mismanagement and corruption. In recent years, Iraq has turned to international financial institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank, for loans and assistance in rebuilding its economy, which aims to improve infrastructure and trade between China and Iraq. While foreign investment holds promise for Iraq's economic recovery, it has also raised concerns about the country's dependence on foreign powers and the potential for further debt accumulation. The path forward: economic and social reforms. Iraq's path to economic recovery and infrastructure rebuilding is a long and difficult one, but it is not without hope. The country's vast natural resources, particularly its oil reserves, provide a foundation for rebuilding, but Iraq must diversify its economy and create a more sustainable future. This will require significant investment in sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and services, as well as efforts to combat corruption and improve governance. Improving Iraq's infrastructure will be key to its recovery. Rebuilding the energy sector, improving access to electricity and clean water, and modernizing transportation systems will be critical for Iraq's long-term growth. The government will need to work with international partners, both public and private, to secure the necessary funding and expertise for these projects. Social reforms will also be important for Iraq's future, and healthcare will require long-term investment and political will. Iraq's young population, many of whom have grown up in the shadow of war and instability, will be a key factor in shaping the country's future. Providing education, job opportunities,